Terry Jackson lived in the shadows of his own past, a man carved from hardship and regret. His skin marked not only by time but by the harsh judgments of a world unwilling to forget. At 50, his face bore the weariness of years spent behind bars, years he wished to erase but could never quite outrun. The cold New Jersey winter seeped into the bones of his small neighborhood, where cracked sidewalks and faded streetlights whispered stories of forgotten lives, and Terry's was one of them. He moved through the gray streets with the quiet resignation of someone who knew he was seen, but never truly looked at, a relic of a past that still chained him tighter than any prison ever could. His auto repair shop, a dimly lit space cluttered with rusted tools and stubborn engines, was his sanctuary and his sentence. Each wrench turned was a small act of defiance against the world that labeled him a criminal, a mistake. The shop's cracked windows framed a city that had moved on without him, neighbors who nodded in cold politeness but never crossed the threshold, their eyes flickering with suspicion. Terry felt their silent verdict in every glance. He was an outsider, an echo of a life best forgotten. Inside, beneath the grease-stained overalls and calloused hands, lay a heart heavy with loneliness, aching for redemption but shackled by shame. He carried the weight of those years not just on his shoulders but in every hesitant word, every cautious smile that barely reached his tired eyes. His past was a silent ghost, haunting each morning's cold breath, a constant reminder that the world outside his shop's battered door was not built for a man like him. Yet, beneath the surface of hardened exterior and weary isolation, Terry nursed a fragile hope, that maybe, just maybe, the darkness could lift, and he might find a place where the mistakes of yesterday would no longer define the man he was trying so desperately to become. One bitter evening, as the sky bled into shades of bruised purple and the cold tightened its grip on the streets, Terry locked the shop with hands stiff from the day's labor. The city's distant hum was punctuated by the soft, almost imperceptible sound of a child's cry. Fragile, desperate, a threadbare plea lost amidst the concrete wilderness. His breath caught, and for a moment, the years of numbness peeled away, replaced by something raw and urgent. He followed the sound instinctively, as if some buried part of himself recognized the pain in that small, broken voice. Down a narrow alley shadowed by flickering neon signs, Terry found him, a boy no older than 6, shivering beneath a threadbare blanket, eyes wide with confusion and terror. The child's thin frame trembled violently, limbs wrapped tightly around his own chest, seeking warmth that the cruel night refused to offer. Terry's heart clenched painfully, a knot of guilt and sorrow tightening in his chest. How many times had he felt this same cold isolation? How many nights had he been invisible, abandoned by the world that now abandoned this boy? Kneeling down, Terry spoke softly, voice rough yet tender, the words heavy with unspoken promises. "Hey kid, it's okay. You're safe now." The boy's eyes flickered with a mixture of fear and fragile hope, searching for trust in a stranger's face. Terry's own barriers cracked, the years of bitterness melting away in the warmth of this innocent, vulnerable life. He wrapped the boy in his own coat, its worn fabric barely a shield against the biting wind, but a symbol of something new. Protection, connection, maybe even redemption. In that moment, beneath the cold glare of street lamps and the indifferent gaze of the city, Terry felt a surge of purpose flood through his veins. This boy, lost, forgotten, abandoned, was a mirror to his own fractured soul. To save him was to begin saving himself. The silence of the streets gave way to a fragile, trembling heartbeat, 2 lives colliding in the vast loneliness, both yearning for a second chance. The boy's fragile form trembled beneath the heavy coat, but it was more than the cold that shook him. His breath was shallow, uneven, as if each inhale was a painful effort, and the faint rasp in his lungs whispered of something far more ominous. Terry's hands, rough from years of labor, trembled as he gently lifted the boy into his arms, feeling the faint weight of a life so precariously balanced between survival and surrender. The child's eyes fluttered weakly, a flicker of trust mingled with confusion, but there was something in that fragile gaze, a quiet plea for safety, for relief from a pain Terry had no way yet to soothe. A knot of dread tightened in Terry's chest, an old familiar panic that clawed beneath his skin. He had seen this before, Not with children, but with men broken by the system, bodies and spirits worn thin by neglect and hardship. The boy's condition was a brutal echo of his own past wounds, and the fear that whispered to him now was primal. What if he was too late? What if this child, too, would be lost to a cold world that had no mercy left? The thought was unbearable, a shadow creeping over the fragile warmth growing between them. Terry's mind raced, every instinct screaming to act but every resource seeming impossibly out of reach. His shop was no place for a sick child. His own past barred him from easy help, from turning to authorities or hospitals without risking exposure to demons he thought long buried. Yet, the urgency in the boy's labored breathing was a cruel reminder that doing nothing was not an option. The man who had spent years running from his own mistakes now faced a new, unimaginable responsibility, to protect and heal a life that was not his own, but somehow had become everything. In that cold alley, the world narrowed to the sharp ache in Terry's chest and the fragile warmth in his arms. He whispered soft reassurances to the boy, though the tremble in his voice betrayed the turmoil within. The weight of helplessness pressed down, yet beneath it, a fierce determination burned, to fight for this small life, to break the cycle of abandonment and despair. For once, Terry did not want to run from the darkness but to stand in its face, and for this boy, he would summon every ounce of courage left inside him. The weight of the boy in his arms felt heavier now, not because of his size but the gravity of the decision pressing on Terry's chest like an unyielding stone. The alley's cold bite seeped into his skin, but it was the cold uncertainty gnawing at his heart that made him shiver. He had wrestled with silence long enough, years spent hiding from his past, burying pain deep beneath layers of indifference. Yet here, in this dimly lit corner of a city that never truly cared, a fragile life depended on his courage to break that silence. His fingers trembled as they searched his pocket for the phone, the device suddenly seeming alien, a strange link to a world he'd long tried to avoid. Each second stretched unbearably, the boy's shallow breaths echoing against the empty walls, fragile like glass threatening to shatter. Terry's mind spiraled into chaos. What if the authorities took the boy away? What if this act of help became a chain that dragged him back into the darkness he'd fought to escape? Yet, the boy's fragile life was no longer a question of his fears. It was an urgent call demanding action. He dialed the number almost mechanically, his voice caught between desperation and hope as the line connected. The voice on the other end was a cold contrast to the warmth and panic flooding Terry's veins, a trained professional, detached yet efficient, guiding him through protocols and procedures that sounded both bureaucratic and distant. But beneath the clinical words, Terry sensed an unspoken humanity, a silent promise that the boy's shattered world might be mended. As he relayed the boy's condition, every detail etched with painful clarity, the trembling, the shallow breathing, the vacant eyes, Terry felt a flood of memories rise unbidden. The helplessness he'd felt as a child, the nights spent alone with nothing but fear for company. The lines between past and present blurred, and with every word spoken, the walls he'd built around his heart cracked just a little more. He was no longer just a bystander to another's pain but a reluctant guardian standing at the edge of redemption. The conversation ended with instructions. An ambulance would come, the boy would be taken to a hospital, and Terry would be asked to provide his information. His hands, once so steady in hiding his own wounds, now shook with a mixture of relief and terror. The boy stirred faintly against his chest, and Terry pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead, a silent vow that this time, he would not let the darkness win. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with shadows, but for this moment, amidst the cold night and distant sirens, there was a fragile thread of hope, fragile yet unbreakable. Terry's world had been carved out of shadows long before that cold night in the alley. Years of running, hiding, and numbing pain had made him a ghost in his own life, a man who had mastered the art of disappearance, blending into the background so thoroughly that even his own reflection seemed like a stranger. But when he held that trembling boy in his arms, something irrevocable shifted. It was as if the fragile pulse of that small life ignited a long-dormant ember within him, stirring memories and feelings he had buried beneath layers of regret and isolation. The boy's presence became a mirror, reflecting Terry's own fractured past back at him with brutal clarity. In those quiet moments of urgency and fear, he confronted the echoes of his childhood, the wounds inflicted by neglect, the silent screams of abandonment, the loneliness that had gnawed at his spirit for decades. Yet, alongside the ache, there grew a fierce resolve. This was no longer just about survival. It was about reclaiming something lost: hope, purpose, and the chance to mend what had been broken. The days that followed blurred into a whirlwind of hospital visits, whispered conversations with doctors, and long nights spent watching over the boy's restless sleep. Terry found himself peeling back layers of his own emotional armor, exposing vulnerabilities he had sworn never to show. The boy's frailty demanded not only physical care but emotional presence, something Terry had never learned to give, but now, for the first time, was determined to try. Each small victory in the boy's recovery felt like a personal triumph against the darkness that had threatened to consume them both. But change is never easy, and Terry's transformation was haunted by shadows that refused to fade. Old fears whispered from the corners of his mind, doubts that he was unworthy, unfit, destined to fail. The world he had carefully distanced himself from now loomed closer, with memories of mistakes and lost chances pressing down like a relentless tide. Yet, the fragile trust the boy placed in him became a lifeline, pulling Terry from the depths of despair and forcing him to confront his past rather than flee from it. In the process, Terry began to unravel the tangled threads of his own identity. He questioned the man he had become and the man he wanted to be. Each tear shed in the quiet darkness was both a mourning for what had been lost and a baptism into a new existence. The boy was more than a charge. He was a catalyst, a reminder that even the most broken souls could find redemption in the fragile act of caring for another. This slow, painful awakening reshaped Terry's life. Walls he had built for self-preservation crumbled beneath the weight of genuine connection. The ache of loneliness, once an unending companion, softened into a distant memory as he allowed himself to hope, to feel, to believe in the possibility of renewal. The journey was far from over, fraught with uncertainty and the ghosts of old mistakes, but for the first time in years, Terry dared to step forward into the light, guided by the fragile heartbeat of a boy who had unknowingly saved him.